Hello, American literature students. Okay, so we had a snow day. I'm at home. I've got my Thoreau Society coffee cup. I'm enjoying a warm house with a very cold, blustery scene outside the window. But we have a bit of a dilemma in our class because we've already had one snow day, and we really do have some material that we have to get through before we arrive at midterm and before our midterm exam. So if you look at the schedule as I have it open up on our course page here today, you'll see that today we were going to do our intro into Volume D, and we're going to go over Masters and Robinson, and you were supposed to bring in some challenge questions. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to give a video sort of overview of this part of the unit, the intro American literature section. And then we'll touch very briefly upon Masters and Robinson on Tuesday of next week. And I really do want you to bring in the challenge questions that you completed for those things to show that you engaged them. And then we'll jump right into Anderson. And I do want you to read the Freudian Revolution handout that's listed in the schedule. And all of this I'm placing, this video recording and everything else I'm placing in lessons in this unit on our snow day supplements is what I'm calling it. And if you click on those, there's also, I will post a couple of videos that are sort of a final wrap up on the awakening. And also there's a set of lecture notes on modernism. And as you can see, you can click on those and you can open them up and read them. And I thought I would just go over these very quickly and refer to the unit as much as I could. In class, I would ask you to share your challenge questions with us, and also then to kind of go through the unit bit by bit. But what I'm going to do right now, and I have about 13 minutes to do this, I'm going to go over this handout and provide an overview, and I'll just ask that you please view the video, and we'll touch upon it in class on Tuesday. But for the most part, you should know these major concepts. Okay, so here's the basic thing about the modern. The modern is, as we've been saying, this transition from the realism and naturalism that we've been looking at has called into question a lot of our places in the universe. So these deep questions, these deeper ideas about sort of what's it all about, and some sense that maybe we're not exalted beings, and the key that I keep coming back to is really a question of tradition, and the great traditions that we relate to in literature in particular are what are described in page on page 6 in your introduction to volume D, which is to say that the biggest element that happens in the modern is the three literary conflicts. The conflict with how writing is going to deal with all these historical things that you see outlined in this handout here. So this is the history that's going on. But from a literary standpoint, how do we grapple with these issues in relation to the literary tradition? If part of the modern is sort of discounting the ideas of the past as being sort of, naive or optimistic, but we have these great literary traditions. I mean, what do you do with Shakespeare then? Do we go back to Shakespeare? Do we use the Greeks? Do we use the great literature that's come before, or do we just dismiss it and say they didn't know what was going on? They didn't understand the modern world as we do. So how do we respond to the previous literary tradition? The other thing is, how does pop culture or popular culture weave or have an impact in the literature itself? So the big example from the period we'll be looking at is the impact of the jazz age in sort of the current trends and the things that are sort of going on in the popular culture at the time that, previously perhaps wasn't the domain of literature. Literature was about important, distinctive, highfalutin things. But what about the popular culture that's going on? And then the other thing is, in America and elsewhere, the political and social struggle, race, class, ethnicity, and gender. These are the key elements that always rear their heads in the modern, or in any period, but in this modern, that's really what we're dealing with. And it's a tumultuous time. That's the key that you see at the top of the handout here. There is this great sense of progress. Now in America, we've come out of this sort of sense of the Civil War, where we came into our own as a country. We survived that struggle in certain ways, and now we're going to see what we can do as far as art, as far as commerce, and we have this war in Cuba, and we do pretty well. We have the development of the Great White Fleet, the American Navy, the is being built up under Theodore Roosevelt and other people. Successful wars in Cuba and the Philippines, lot of great technical advances. A lot of stuff's going on in America with oil, with banking, with railroads, with Thomas Edison, inventors. It's the place to be for all the sort of innovation that's coming out. I mean, a lot of the innovation that's coming out. And so it's an emerging power. And then by the time of World War I, note that this period that we're looking at is 1914 to 1945. We are interested in those demarcations because they describe World War I to World War II. And by the time of World War I, it's really America that comes in and in some ways rescues Europe. And it's our power and our might that sort of builds from there on out all the way up into World War II, where obviously we're key players in that struggle as well. Now, out of this great optimism, so the example I'm condensing a lot from the unit, but the example that I always give is that you have, at the turn of the century, in 1903, you have the Wright brothers, and for the first time we have heavier than air flight occurring. And within one generation, within about 60 years, we have men walking on the moon. That is an incredible exponential change in technology. And think about all the things in that period of time between 1903 and the late 1960s. The telephone, the phonograph. People had never heard recorded voices before. Motion pictures, photography, global mass media. A transatlantic cable is laid. Suddenly we're able to sort of communicate with Europe almost instantaneously, and it gets better every year. So we're becoming more and more of a global village, less isolated, and those are the key elements that are so wonderful and emerging in technology. But at the same time, we have a great sense of pessimism because in World War I, you have the machine gun. You have tanks. You have that same air power that the Wright brothers helped to invent being used to drop bombs. You have civilian populations being targeted, and you have millions and millions of people being killed. We'll explore this more fully in a unit on World War I when we get to Hemingway and others. But so do you see the tension there? There's a tension between great hope and promise and great pessimism about what this all means. And this exponential change causes people to have a sense of anxiety, a sense of nervousness about where this world is headed. Some of the scientific achievements themselves lead to this real sort of sense of uncertainty, because in the nature and science section in your unit, it talks about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Relativity coming out of Einstein, quantum physics, uncontrollable technology at the end of this unit with the nuclear weapons. There's a lot that is very unsettling about what the sort of can of worms we're opening as human beings in these technological areas that we don't fully understand. And a lot of what Einstein, I mean, relativity is with Newton, the apple falls, we know when it's going to fall, we know how it's going to fall, we think we understand gravity. But at the turn of the century with Einstein and others, and Heisenberg, a lot of that is called into question. We don't really know. Things are more relative. There's less idea of an absolute truth and certainty. That's the general idea or general sense of the modern. I think, further on down, I want to make sure we stress this. There's a lot of emphasis also moving from Darwin, from sort of biological determinism to a more Freudian sort of emphasis, especially in the arts and literature. Freud and Jung, a lot of emphasis on suppression of desires, and then those suppressed urges and desires coming out in unusual ways. We'll talk more about Freud in our next class meeting. being conflicted, having conflicted emotions, anxiety, id, ego, superego, the idea that there's a part of us that we don't really control. That's a key feature that emerges from this. And on the social front, we have Marxism or socialism emerging as well, which is a rethinking about the role of capitalism and class and the role that workers play in that reality as well. If workers all get together and say, we're not going to report for work on Friday at the factory, and good luck making a buck. Factory owners, bourgeois, the bourgeois, good luck making a buck. The people who own the means of production are the workers themselves. And if we band together, we can exercise power that we might not otherwise think that we have. Historically, what you really need to keep in mind, and is stressed in the chapter, is from this pessimistic or this conflict area. Not only do we have World War I, but in the South we have a lot of just extreme racial violence with the lynch laws and Jim Crow and racial strife, and this causes a push of population change through the Great Migration. If you look at the inside cover of your book, they talk about how there's this change from the rural to the urban, so people are moving into the cities, and then there's this little sweep of all these people from the South up into the cities, primarily African American workers in what's known as the Great Migration. And as a result of that, we have development of these sort of racial enclaves such as Harlem in New York, which is almost all one ethnicity, African American, and there's great artistic movements that emerge out of that. We have great artistic movements such as jazz and blues emerging that are part of the creation of this sort of unique circumstances of America. And we also have in the 1930s, of course, the Great Depression, and the Great Depression is an extremely important element that has its roots in a lot of areas of American. It's a worldwide depression, by the way, and that depression is broken, obviously, by the time we go into World War II, or because of World War II. And in the Great Depression, we also have ecological issues like the Dust Bowl that explore we have these problems with all the environmental catastrophe of the droughts and the dust bowls in the West. And we also, in the midst of all this, in 1920, we have the Prohibition, and we have women getting the right to vote. A lot of stuff is happening all at once. We also have very restrictive immigration laws that are sort of tempering the amount of people that can come in, and an emphasis to try and preserve a kind of white majority. And these are all elements that are mixed together that your chapter tries to go over quite thoroughly from a historical standpoint that we have to keep in mind in the background of our reading. So change, quickening change and conflict seems to be one of the primary sort of traits of this modern period. The emergence of fascism in the 30s as people try to look to the strong leaders that might be able to bring some control over everything. And then this sort of coalesces into this theoretical or philosophical movement that we call modernism. As your book points out, modernism is really about this sense of loss. On page 13, that's the key place to look, and it says, most English language literary contexts, modernism is a catch-all term for any kind of literary production in the interwar period that deals with the modern world. More narrowly, it refers to the work that represents the transformation of traditional society under the pressures of modernity, and that breaks down traditional literary forms in doing so against the tradition. And what is lost in the result of that. So we think about modernism, we think about cubism, Dadaism, surrealism, all these sort of isms that emerge in the art world. And in the literary world, it's really, really nicely described in your book at the bottom page 13 and the top page 14. At the heart of high modernist aesthetic lay the conviction that the previously sustaining structures of human life, whether social, political, religious, or artistic, had been destroyed or shown up as falsehoods, or, at best, arbitrary and fragile human constructions. Order, sequences, and unity in works of art might well express human desires for coherence rather than reliable intuitions of reality. Generalizations, abstractions, and high-flown writing might conceal rather than convey the real. The form of a story with its beginnings, complications, and resolutions might be an artifice imposed on the flux and fragmentation of experience. To the extent that art falsely presented such an order as given or natural, it had to be renovated. So the second part of this lecture on modernism is going to focus on some of those forms and a few more definitions, and then we'll be done, and hopefully we'll be set in order to explore modernism in all its sort of iterations through the readings that we're going to encounter in the next several weeks.